Betrayal cuts deepest when it uses what you love most. Imagine your own kids, your heart, turned against you by lies. This is a story of a father's fight to protect his boys from a manipulative ex. My name is Jake, 40 years old, and I've been a construction worker my whole life. My hands are calloused. My back aches after a long day, but nothing compares to the pain of losing time with my boys, Ethan and Lucas. They're 10 and 8, full of energy. With Ethan's goofy grin and Lucas's quiet curiosity, after my divorce from Sarah 3 years ago, I thought we'd figured it out: shared custody, civil co-parenting, the works. I believed we both wanted what was best for our kids. Man, was I wrong. The divorce wasn't messy, at least not at first. Sarah and I met in our 20s, back when I was hauling lumber and she was a receptionist at a dental office. We had a good run. But by our mid-30s, we were more like roommates than partners. No big fights, just a slow drift apart. When we split, we agreed on 50-50 custody. I'd get the boys Wednesday through Sunday one week, then Monday through Friday the next. I rented a small 2-bedroom apartment near their school, fixed it up with bunk beds and a second-hand Xbox. Every weekend, we'd build model rockets or watch Marvel movies, sprawled out on the couch with popcorn. Those moments were everything. I'm not perfect. Work's tough, long hours, unpredictable weather, and the pay's decent but not great. I make about $55,000 a year, enough to cover my bills, child support, and a little extra for the boys' soccer gear or school supplies. Sarah got the house in the divorce, and I didn't fight it. I just wanted to keep things peaceful for Ethan and Lucas. She'd always been practical, or so I thought. When we signed the papers, she hugged me and said, "We'll make this work for them." I believed her. But 6 months after the divorce, things started feeling off. Sarah would call me late at night, asking for a little extra money. "The boys need new shoes," she'd say, or "the electric bill's higher this month." I didn't mind helping. Hell, I'd do anything for my kids, but the requests kept coming. $200 here, $500 there. I'd dip into my savings, skip a few personal expenses, because she'd always frame it like the boys would suffer if I didn't pay up. "You don't want them going without, right, Jake?" she'd say, her voice sweet but sharp. I didn't see it then, but that was the start, the first crack in what I thought was a solid co-parenting setup. I'd drop the boys off at her place, and they'd be quieter than usual. Ethan stopped hugging me as tightly. Lucas would avoid my eyes. I chalked it up to them adjusting to the divorce, but deep down, something gnawed at me. Why did it feel like my own kids were pulling away? One night, after I wired Sarah another $300 for school fees, Ethan called me. His voice was small, shaky. "Dad, why don't you want to see us anymore?" My heart stopped. I gripped the phone, my throat tight. "Buddy, what are you talking about? I'd never miss a second with you." He went quiet, then mumbled, "Mom said you're too busy for us." That was the moment I realized Sarah wasn't just asking for money. She was playing a much uglier game. I stayed up all night, replaying every interaction with her since the divorce, the late-night calls, the vague excuses, the way she'd smile when I handed over cash. I thought about confronting her, but what could I say? She was their mom. I didn't want to drag the boys into a fight, so I kept paying, hoping it would keep the peace, but it only got worse, and I was too naive to see how far she'd go. Before all this mess with Sarah started, life felt like it had a rhythm. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. Growing up, I was the kid who loved building things, tree houses, go-karts, you name it. That's how I ended up in construction. Swinging a hammer by 18, apprenticing with a local crew. It's honest work, even if it leaves you bone-tired. By my mid-20s, I was running my own small jobs, framing houses, pouring concrete, dreaming of starting my own contracting business someday. I met Sarah at a friend's barbecue when I was 26. She was 24, confident, with this laugh that made everyone turn their heads. She was working as a receptionist, always organized, always on top of things. We hit it off fast. Dates at dive bars, late-night drives, planning a future. 2 years later, we got married in a small backyard ceremony. Ethan came along a year after that, and Lucas followed 2 years later. Those early years were chaotic but good. I'd come home dusty from a site, and Sarah would have the boys fed, the house smelling like spaghetti. We were a team. Money was tight, though, construction's feast or famine. Some months I'd pull in overtime, Others I'd be scraping by. Sarah handled the bills, and I trusted her completely. She'd always say, "We're in this together, Jake." I believed it. We bought a modest house in a quiet suburb, 3 bedrooms, a patchy lawn the boys loved tearing up. I built them a swing set in the backyard, and we'd spend Sundays pushing them higher and higher, their giggles echoing. Those were the days I thought we'd nailed it: family, love, a home. But cracks started showing. By the time Ethan was 6 and Lucas was 4, Sarah and I were drifting. I'd be gone 10-hour days, sometimes 6 days a week. To keep us afloat, she'd get frustrated, saying I was married to the job. I'd argue I was doing it for us, for the boys. Conversations turned into silences. Dinners became her scrolling her phone while I ate with the kids. We weren't fighting, just fading. When she suggested divorce, it wasn't a shock. It hurt. But it felt like the honest thing. "Let's do this right for Ethan and Lucas," she said. I nodded, thinking we'd keep it clean. The divorce process was straightforward. We sat down with a mediator, split our savings, and agreed she'd keep the house since the boys were settled there. I found my apartment, a 20-minute drive from them, and poured everything into making it a home: bunk beds, posters of Spider-Man, a cheap dining table for homework. I was determined to be the dad they deserved. Even if I wasn't under the same roof, Sarah seemed on board. She'd text me the boys' soccer schedules, and we'd coordinate pickups. Like clockwork, I thought we'd crack the co-parenting code. I leaned hard into being dad. Weekends were sacred: pancake breakfasts, trips to the park, teaching Ethan how to kick a soccer ball without tripping over his own feet. Lucas loved drawing, so I'd buy him sketch pads, sit with him while he scribbled dinosaurs. Work was still grueling, but I'd save up for little things: a new video game, a day at the arcade. I wasn't flush, but I made it work. Child support was $800 a month, and I paid it on time. Every time. Sarah never complained, and the boys seemed happy bouncing between us. Looking back, I missed the signs. Sarah's texts got shorter, her tone colder. She'd mention unexpected expenses, but never show receipts. I'd ask how the boys were, and she'd say, "Fine," then change the subject. I thought she was just stressed, maybe adjusting to single life. I didn't push. I wanted peace, for the boys' sake. I told myself we were still a team, just in a different way. But that trust, that belief we were still working for the same goal, that's what left me wide open for what came next. The first signs of trouble were so subtle I barely noticed them. It was maybe 6 months after the divorce, and I was still getting used to the rhythm of shared custody. I'd pick up Ethan and Lucas from Sarah's house, and they'd be a little off, quieter, less excited to see me. I figured it was just the adjustment, you know? Divorce is hard on kids. But then Sarah's late-night call started, always with the same script. "Jake, the boys need something," she'd say, her voice dripping with urgency. New backpacks, field trip fees, a broken fridge. I'd send the money, no questions asked. Because what kind of dad says no to that? It started small: $100 for school supplies, $200 for a dentist bill. I was making about $55,000 a year, and after rent, child support, and bills, my budget was tight. But I'd cut corners, skip a new pair of work boots, or eat ramen for a week to make it work. Sarah always made it sound like the boys would suffer if I didn't pay up. "You don't want Ethan going to school in torn sneakers, do you?" she'd ask. I'd grit my teeth and Venmo her the cash, thinking I was doing right by my kids. But then the requests got weirder. One night, she called asking for $400 for extracurriculars. I asked what kind: soccer? Art classes? She got vague, saying, "Oh, stuff to keep them busy." I pressed for details, and she snapped, "Why do you care?" "It's for the boys." That stung. I cared about every detail of their lives. I started noticing she'd only call when the boys weren't with me, like she didn't want them overhearing. I'd ask Ethan and Lucas about their new activities, but they'd shrug, confused. "We're not doing anything new, Dad," Ethan said once, kicking a soccer ball in my tiny living room. Then came the canceled visits. Sarah would text last minute, "The boys are sick. Better not come." Or, "We've got a family thing. Let's skip this weekend." I'd call to check on them, but she'd rush me off the phone. "They're fine, Jake. Don't worry." But I did worry. I missed my boys. I'd sit in my apartment, staring at their empty bunk beds, the silence deafening. I'd text them good night, But their replies got shorter, sometimes just K. My gut twisted, but I told myself kids go through phases. The real kick in the teeth was Ethan's call that night, the one I mentioned before. "Dad, why don't you want to see us?" he asked, his voice small. I was floored. I spent every spare dollar and second on them. When he said, "Mom said you're too busy." It was like a punch to the chest. I tried to explain, but he hung up, saying, "I gotta go." I called Sarah right after, my hand shaking. "What are you telling them?" I demanded. She played dumb. "I don't know what you mean, Jake. Maybe they're just upset about the divorce." Her voice was calm, too calm, like she'd rehearsed it. That's when I started paying attention. I noticed how she'd always ask for money right before my scheduled time with the boys. If I hesitated, she'd forget to bring them to the pickup spot. Once, I drove to her house after a canceled visit, and I saw them playing in the yard, perfectly healthy. When I confronted her, she said, "They got better. Okay? Stop overreacting." But I saw the smirk on her face, like she knew she had me cornered. I started keeping a notebook, jotting down every call, every payment, every missed visit. I didn't know what I'd do with it, but something told me I needed proof. I felt like I was losing my boys, and I couldn't figure out why Sarah was doing this. Was it greed? Control? I'd lie awake, replaying our marriage, wondering if I'd missed some sign of who she really was. All I knew was I had to keep showing up for Ethan and Lucas, no matter what she threw at me. Sarah's game didn't just continue, it got uglier. By the time I realized she was using the boys as pawns, her demands were relentless. The money requests jumped from hundreds to thousands. One week, she texted, "The boys' school fees are overdue. Jake, $1,200 by Friday, or they can't stay enrolled." My stomach dropped. I called the school to verify, and they confirmed everything was paid. When I confronted her, she laughed it off. "Must have been a mix-up," she said, but her eyes were cold. I sent $800 anyway, terrified she'd keep the boys from me if I didn't. She started weaponizing my time with them. If I couldn't pay or wouldn't, she'd cancel my visits with flimsy excuses. "Lucas has a stomach bug," she'd claim. But when I'd call to check on him, she wouldn't pick up. Once, I showed up at her house after another sick day excuse, and Ethan answered the door, surprised. "Dad? Mom said you had to work." I forced a smile, ruffled his hair, and said, "Never too busy for you, buddy." But inside, I was boiling. Sarah just shrugged when I asked why she lied. "They must have misunderstood," she said, turning away like I was nothing. The worst part was how it affected the boys. Ethan, my goofy 10-year-old who used to tackle me with hugs, started acting distant. He'd sit on the couch during our weekends, arms crossed, barely talking. Lucas, always the sensitive one, would cling to me one minute, then pull away the next, like he didn't know who to trust. One night, while we were building a model rocket, Lucas whispered, "Mom says you don't pay for stuff we need." I froze, the glue stick shaking in my hand. "Lucas, I pay everything I can," I said, keeping my voice steady. He looked down, unconvinced. "Then why does Mom say we might lose the house?" I felt like I'd been stabbed. Sarah was planting lies in their heads, making me the bad guy. I wanted to scream, to drive to her house and demand answers, but I couldn't. The boys were caught in the middle, and I wouldn't make it worse. Instead, I hugged Lucas and said, "I'll always take care of you, no matter what." But the doubt in his eyes haunted me. I started losing sleep, my mind racing. Was I failing them? Was I not doing enough? Work wasn't a refuge either. I was showing up to job sites exhausted, snapping at coworkers, missing deadlines. My boss pulled me aside one day, saying, "Jake, get it together or you're out." I nodded, but my head wasn't in it. Every dollar I earned seemed to vanish. $800 for child support, $500 for Sarah's emergencies, rent, groceries. I was drowning, dipping into my savings until there was barely anything left. I sold my old truck to cover one of her $1,500 demands for medical bills. When I asked for proof, she sent a blurry photo of a hospital form, but the dates didn't add up. The emotional toll was crushing. I'd sit in my apartment after the boys went back to Sarah's, staring at their drawings taped to the fridge, wondering if they'd ever see me the way they used to. I stopped calling friends, stopped going to the gym. My world shrank to work. The boys and Sarah's endless demands. I'd check my phone obsessively, dreading her next text but terrified to miss it. What if she kept them from me for good? I started drinking more than I should, a couple beers turning into a six-pack, just to quiet the panic. One night, Ethan texted me, "Dad, are you mad at us?" I called him immediately, my voice cracking. "Never, buddy. I love you and Lucas more than anything." He was quiet, then said, "Mom says you don't care about us anymore." I couldn't breathe. I told him it wasn't true, but the line went dead. That was when I knew Sarah's lies weren't just about money. They were tearing my boys away from me, piece by piece. I never thought I'd hit a point where I felt like I was losing everything, but that's exactly where I landed. Sarah's lies had turned my boys against me, and I was barely holding on. By now, her demands were constant: $2,000,004. Home repairs, $700 for school uniforms, another $1,000 for therapy she claimed the boys needed because of me. I was broke, emotionally and financially. My savings were gone, my credit cards maxed out. I'd sold my old truck, my tools, even my dad's old watch just to keep up. I was living paycheck to paycheck, barely covering rent and the $800 child support, let alone Sarah's extra needs. The worst wasn't the money, it was Ethan and Lucas. They barely looked at me anymore. When I'd pick them up, they'd climb into my beat-up sedan in silence, staring out the window. Ethan, who used to chatter nonstop about soccer, would mumble one-word answers. Lucas wouldn't even bring his sketchpad anymore. One weekend, I tried to lighten the mood, suggesting we build a new model rocket. Ethan snapped, "Why bother, Dad? You're never around anyway." I tried to explain, but he just put on his headphones. Lucas didn't even look up from his phone. I felt like a ghost in their lives. Sarah's cancellations got bolder. She'd block my weekends with the boys, claiming they had plans or weren't feeling up to it. When I'd call to talk to them, she'd say they were busy or asleep. Once, I drove to her house after 3 canceled visits in a row, desperate to see them. The lights were on, but no one answered the door. I heard Lucas laughing inside, and it broke me. I sat in my car, head against the steering wheel, tears burning my eyes. My own kids were 20 feet away, and I couldn't reach them. Work was falling apart too. I was showing up late, distracted, my hands shaky from lack of sleep. My boss gave me a final warning. "Jake, you're a good worker, but you're slipping. Fix it." I nodded, but I was barely eating, barely functioning. I'd stopped drinking with friends, but alone in my apartment, I'd polish off a bottle of cheap whiskey, trying to numb the ache. I'd stare at old photos of the boys, Ethan's first soccer goal, Lucas's crayon drawings, and wonder where I went wrong. Was I a bad dad? Did I deserve this? The lowest moment came one night when Ethan called, crying, "Dad, Mom says we can't see you anymore unless you pay for our new house." I couldn't speak. My 10-year-old was being used as a bargaining chip. "Buddy, I'm trying so hard." I choked out, "You don't have to worry about that." But he sobbed, "I don't want to lose you." After we hung up, I sat on the floor, my back against the wall, and broke down. I felt like I'd failed them. Sarah was winning, and I was losing my boys. I stopped answering calls, even from my parents. My mom left voicemails, worried, but I couldn't face her. I was ashamed of being broke, of letting Sarah manipulate me, of not being the dad I promised to be. I kept my notebook, scribbling down every text, every demand, every lie, but it felt pointless. What could I do? Confronting Sarah only made her double down, and I was terrified she'd cut me off completely. I'd lie awake, imagining a future where Ethan and Lucas grew up thinking I abandoned them. That thought was worse than anything. One night, I hit my limit. I was staring at a $3,000 demand from Sarah for moving costs when my phone buzzed with a text from Lucas. "Dad, do you hate us?" I dropped the phone, my chest so tight I thought I'd pass out. I realized I couldn't keep going like this. I was at rock bottom, and if I didn't fight back, I'd lose my boys for good. Something had to change. That text from Lucas, "Dad, do you hate us?" was the breaking point. It was like a bucket of cold water dumped over my head, waking me up from the fog I'd been stumbling through. I'd been letting Sarah control the narrative, letting her lies chip away at my boys' trust in me. I was done being her punching bag, done letting her twist my love for Ethan and Lucas into a weapon. Sitting there on the floor of my apartment, my phone still glowing with Lucas's words, I realized I had to fight, not just for me, but for them. I couldn't keep paying her off. hoping she'd play fair. She never would. The next morning, I dragged myself out of bed, head pounding from whiskey and exhaustion, and opened the notebook I'd been keeping. Pages of scribbled dates, texts, payments, canceled visits, it was all there. A paper trail of Sarah's manipulation. I'd started it out of instinct, but now it felt like a lifeline. I spent hours reading through it, seeing the pattern clear as day. Every demand for money came with a threat to my time with the boys. Every lie she told them about me not caring, not paying, not showing up coincided with her pushing for more cash. It wasn't about the boys' needs, it was about control. I called my mom, something I hadn't done in months. She picked up on the first ring, her voice thick with worry. "Jake, where have you been?" I broke down, spilling everything: Sarah's lies, the boys pulling away, the money I didn't have. She listened, then said, "You're a good dad, Jake. You need to fight for them. Get a lawyer." A lawyer? I'd never even considered it. I was a construction worker, not some guy who could afford fancy attorneys. But her words stuck. I couldn't just keep reacting. I had to take control. I started researching, spending nights on my laptop, learning about custody laws and parental alienation. I found forums where other parents shared stories like mine. Exes using kids as leverage, courts stepping in when there was proof. Proof? I had that. Didn't I? My notebook was a start, but I needed more. I began screenshotting every text from Sarah, saving every Venmo transaction, even recording our calls when I could. One night, she called demanding $1,500 for new beds for the boys. I asked for receipts, and she hung up. I wrote it down, saved the call log. It felt like building a case, brick by brick. I also started talking to the boys differently. Instead of just reassuring them, I asked questions. "What does mom say about me?" I'd ask gently when we were alone. Ethan admitted, "She says you don't want to pay for our stuff, so we might have to move." Lucas added, "She said you're always working and don't have time for us." It broke my heart, but I stayed calm. "That's not true," I told them. "I work so I can take care of you, and I'll never stop wanting you around." I didn't badmouth Sarah. I couldn't do that to them, but I started planting seeds of truth. I reached out to a lawyer, a guy named Mark, who offered a free consultation through a local legal aid group. I was nervous, sitting in his cramped office, my notebook shaking in my hands. I told him everything: Sarah's demands, the lies, the canceled visits. He flipped through my notes, nodding. "You've got a strong case for parental alienation," he said. "Keep documenting. We can push for a custody modification." It was the first time I felt hope in months, but also fear. What if I lost? What if Sarah twisted this against me too? I left his office with a plan. Keep records, stay steady with the boys, and stop giving in to Sarah's demands. The next time she texted for money, $800 for school fees, I replied, "Send me the invoice first." She didn't respond. For the first time, I felt a spark of power. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was fighting for my boys, and I was ready to take Sarah on. For the first time in months, I felt like I was climbing out of the hole Sarah had pushed me into. That moment of saying no to her latest money demand, $800 for school fees, without proof, was small but seismic. It was like I'd finally grabbed the wheel after letting her steer for too long. I wasn't just a dad scrambling to keep up. I was a dad fighting for my boys. But fighting meant getting stronger, smarter, and ready for a battle I never wanted. I had to rebuild myself to save my relationship with Ethan and Lucas. I started with work. I'd been a mess on the job site, late, distracted, one step from getting fired. I sat down with my boss, admitted I'd been struggling, and asked for a chance to prove myself. He gave me a hard look, but nodded. "Show up, Jake. We need you." I threw myself into it, showing up early, double-checking blueprints, even volunteering for overtime. The extra hours meant more money, which I funneled into a savings account for legal fees instead of Sarah's endless demands. Slowly, my confidence crept back. I wasn't just a paycheck. I was good at my job, and that reminded me I was capable of more. With the boys, I focused on rebuilding trust. Sarah's lies had done damage, but I wasn't going to let her rewrite who I was to them. During our weekends, I stopped trying to force the old days, rocket building, movie nights, and just listened. One Saturday, while we ate pizza on my couch, I asked Ethan what he loved about soccer. His eyes lit up. talking about a goal he scored. Lucas chimed in about a dinosaur drawing he'd made. I praised them, asked questions, showed them I saw them. When they repeated Sarah's lies, like, Mom says you don't care about our school. I didn't argue. I'd say, I care about everything you do. Bud, that's why I'm here. I bought a cheap calendar, marked our days together, and let them add stickers for each visit. It was a small thing, but it showed them I wasn't going anywhere. Legally, I was all in. My lawyer, Mark, became my lifeline. He told me to keep documenting everything: texts, calls, canceled visits. I upgraded my notebook to a spreadsheet, logging every interaction with Sarah. When she texted for $1,000 for dental work, I replied, send the bill. She didn't, and I didn't pay. She canceled my next visit, but I recorded it, drove to her house, and took a photo of the boys playing outside, proving they weren't sick. Mark said, this is gold, Jake, keep it up. He filed a motion to modify custody, citing parental alienation. It felt surreal, like I was betraying Sarah by fighting her. But then I'd remember Lucas's text, do you hate us? And I'd push forward. I also started therapy, something I never thought I'd do. A local clinic offered sliding scale sessions, and I went once a week, talking about Sarah's manipulation, my guilt, my fear of losing the boys. It was like unclogging a drain. The therapist helped me see I wasn't failing Ethan and Lucas. I was being targeted. She taught me how to talk to the boys without bad-mouthing Sarah, how to stay calm when Ethan pushed back or Lucas got quiet. I started feeling like a dad again, not a victim. Sarah didn't make it easy. She doubled down, texting me, you're making this harder than it needs to be, Jake. Once, she called, screaming that I was ruining the boys' lives by not paying her latest $2,000 demand. I stayed calm, recorded it, and sent it to Mark. I wasn't proud of it. I hated fighting dirty, but I was done letting her walk over me. Every step, every saved text, every therapy session made me stronger. I was regaining power, not just over Sarah, but over my own life. I looked at the boys' drawings on my fridge and promised myself I'd fight until they knew I'd never give up on them. The courtroom felt like a pressure cooker, but standing there, waiting for the judge's decision, I felt a strange calm. Months of documenting Sarah's lies, rebuilding myself, and fighting for Ethan and Lucas had led to this. My lawyer, Mark, had built an airtight case, spreadsheets of texts, call logs, Venmo payments, photos of the boys when Sarah claimed they were sick. He even had a child psychologist testify about parental alienation, explaining how Sarah's lies were hurting the boys' trust in me. I sat there, hands sweaty, picturing Ethan's grin and Lucas's quiet hugs, knowing this was for them. When the judge spoke, it felt like the world stopped. Based on the evidence of consistent interference and manipulation, she said, primary custody is awarded to Mr. Thompson, with supervised visitation for Ms. Thompson. My knees nearly buckled. Primary custody, Ethan and Lucas would live with me, go to school from my apartment, sleep in those bunk beds every night. Sarah's face went pale, her usual smirk gone. She'd been ordered to attend parenting classes and therapy, and her visits would be monitored until she proved she could co-parent without manipulation. I didn't feel triumphant, just relieved. My boys were coming home. The transition wasn't instant. Ethan and Lucas were confused, moving from Sarah's house to my cramped apartment. I enrolled them in therapy, too, to untangle the lies they'd been fed. Our first night together, I cooked spaghetti, their favorite, and we sat at the dining table. Ethan poked at his plate, then said, Dad, are we really staying with you now? I nodded, my throat tight. Yeah, bud, every day. Lucas smiled, small but real, and said, can we build a rocket tomorrow? I laughed, tears in my eyes. You bet. Rebuilding our bond took time. Ethan still had moments of anger, testing me with questions like, why didn't you fight for us sooner? I'd answer honestly, I was scared, but I never stopped loving you. Lucas opened up in therapy, admitting he felt guilty for believing Sarah's lies. I hugged him and said, you didn't do anything wrong. I'm here now. We started new routines, soccer practice, drawing sessions, movie nights. I got them a new Xbox game, and we'd laugh, sprawled on the couch, fighting over the controller. Slowly, their trust returned. Ethan's hugs got tighter. Lucas started leaving drawings on my fridge again. Financially, things stabilized. Without Sarah's demands draining me, I could save a little. My boss noticed my focus at work and gave me a small raise, enough to cover therapy and a few extras for the boys. I kept up my own therapy, learning to let go of the guilt I'd carried. Sarah's supervised visits were tense at first. She'd glare at me during drop-offs, but the boys said she was softer with them now, like she knew she'd lost her grip. I didn't trust her, but I hoped, for their sake, she'd change. Looking back, I learned love isn't just about showing up. It's about fighting through the mud when someone tries to tear you down. Sarah used my boys to hurt me, but I didn't let her win. I fought for Ethan and Lucas, not with anger, but with proof, patience, and truth. I learned I'm stronger than I thought, and so are they. My takeaway? Never let anyone weaponize what you love most. You fight for it, no matter how dirty it gets, because that's what makes you a parent. Every night, when I tuck the boys in and see their drawings on the fridge, I know it was worth it. They know I'm their dad, and I'll never stop being there.